There we go. So, John, I'm going to pass over to you. I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us tonight. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me in here. I do really do appreciate it. And I'm going to give you a presentation here, and I wanted to just let you know that the presentation. I'm an adult educator myself. When I'm not doing Yaesu and stuff like that, I work in public safety as a paramedic. I'm one of the supervisors for our department. I am also the training officer, and I actually do teach with the technical college sometimes for paramedic classes. So one thing they warned us when I was trying to become an adult educator is that you want to death by PowerPoint is going to be the death of you as instructing. So I do have some PowerPoint stuff we'll go through, but one of the biggest things I'll kind of go through the information, not super quick, but enough to get a foothold. And then I definitely want to leave time permitting for whoever wants to ask questions. And I strongly suggest asking questions. That's the biggest thing that I recommend to everybody because everybody has to have a starting point, right? I did not know this stuff from digital when it was first coming out. I come from a public safety background, and just to give you a little bit of that kind of background, and I kind of covered that a little bit in the presentation. But I started playing with radios. I started playing with CBs. I didn't know nothing about CBs when I was like a young kid, like, age 10 and 11, 12, that kind of thing. A Radio Shack was a thing at the time. And I say that because now it's kind of like, when I went to school, I had to walk uphill both ways to and from school. It's like now I tell younger people, like, back when I was getting into radio, we had a thing called Radio Shack, not what you operate in at home, but like an actual store. And I learned stuff, I clip transistors. I'm not afraid to say that. And then my folks said, don't go down the CB side, go down the amateur side. But the point of that being is that we all work to get to a level of education and understanding. And that's what I kind of hope to pass on to here today. So let me see if I could share my screen if things go right here. Let's see if this works here. All righty. And let me click into this and start the presentation. Can everybody see the screen okay? Okay, perfect. I didn't know if it was in a PowerPoint mode or not. So good. So I kind of entitled this presentation Yaesu System Fusion in all, because it's kind of in all. And I've had a few people that have said afterwards, you should change it to in awe because of everything that's involved on there. So what we are going to talk tonight about is we are going to talk about Yaesu System Fusion, but with one of the things I found out is that there's a lot of people that have questions on what is it compared to other people, right? Some people are just going to be, the old Jeff Dunham thing, digital is the devil, Walter from Jeff Dunham, and they just hate it. And hands down, they hate it. And others are like, I want to like it, but I don't understand what it is. Like, which one do you do? Why do you do this one? Why do you do this one? And I will tell you right off the bat, digital voice or digital operations is for the most part like vehicles, right? You have Chevys, you have Ford, you have Dodges. Some are going to be personal preference, some are going to be operational preference, some are going to be, what was on sale at the time, those kind of things. What we're going to do and trying to talk to you about is give you the understanding of on the fusion side to help you understand and be able to make an educated guess. Now, one thing I'm going to tell you right off the bat, and I usually get this question right away, is there will never be one digital voice mode. That's not going to happen in public safety. Doesn't happen in business. It's not going to happen in amateur radio. People are like, well, we should just only have one digital voice mode. Well, then I kind of counter in saying, well, then we should only have one data mode. Well, what do you mean? Well, if we're going to say one digital voice mode for all, then we need to say one data mode for all. And so everybody's going to do FT8. Well, that's ridiculous. That doesn't serve a purpose. Well, then what do you want? Well, I want PSK 31, or I want, PACTOR, or this or this or this. Well, I said, so you want to have different data modes, right? Well, then why can't we have different digital voice modes? And a lot of people at that point are like, oh, okay, I see what you did there. So that's kind of what it is. And here's the reason. Each different digital voice mode out there serves a specific purpose. And what I mean by that is that they're designed for a specific purpose with a specific goal in mind. And that truly is what it is. You can't really compare. It's like, once again, apples to oranges on there. And I tell people that because there's a lot of angst or anxiety or stress when it kind of comes to talking about digital voice modes. So before that, I want to give you a little history on it. So while yes, technically my title is National Sales Manager, I kind of have a different title, which is Yaesu System Fusion Expert. And then the other one is kind of VHF, UHF product specialist or knowledge specialist on there. That's where I reside. That's where I started. Am I an extra class amateur radio operator? Yes. I think, to be honest with you, it was maybe field day this year. As a matter of fact, what it is, I actually used the extra portion of the band for the first time ever since I've been an extra. It was about 10 years I've been an extra. But with that, I became licensed in the mid 90s up in northern Wisconsin. We had a 2-meter repeater up there. It worked great. I always had a passion for digital voice and repeater technology. I will tell you, as a kid, I started to play with repeaters. I started to find out this and this and this. I learned what core systems were and cost systems and keying systems and this and this. My first repeater I made was literally strapping 2 mobiles together using a Vox unit, and it literally had to be a whistle up. So the Vox, if you just keyed up, the Vox wouldn't trip. But what he did is you keyed up and you went like that real quick, created some noise. Then the Vox would go ahead and activate, and I was using the repeaters, and it was kind of a cool kind of thing on there. Through that time, I went into, like I said, public safety. I was in, I should say the professional world and public safety in the late 90s when P25 was kicking off. I really enjoyed P25. I really liked it. What ended up happening, though, is that P25 was really cost prohibitive. You only had a few manufacturers when P25 first came out, Motorola, those kind of things. And the old joke was, the model number of the Motorola radio was the cost of that radio, and still kind of holds true today. But with that being said, P25 was there. I played with it a little bit. I'll never forget real quick going into in the Twin Cities here, which I'm near Minneapolis, St. Paul, only about an hour away from it, just on the west side of Wisconsin here. They had a great big ham fest, used to be held every Halloween on there. And one year the ARRL guy came out there, was talking about it. I raised my hand. I said, so what do you feel about digital voice? And the guy's like, well, there's no such thing as digital voice. I'm like, well, there's P25 out there. And the guy, I'll never forget, he went along and he says, it's going to be decades before P25 or any sort of digital voice hits the market. Well, it wasn't decades, but it was about 10 years later that the amateur world started to become ablaze with digital voice on there. My claim to fame that I really like as being part of Yaesu is that I have assisted and worked with a total of 67 different systems or repeater setups on there. And all of them that I've worked on have been able to function in a pure digital voice state or in a mixed mode state, which is analog and digital together. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons Yaesu actually went along and recruited me was that when System Fusion first came out, I saw that it was a C4FM FDMA type system. We'll cover that in the presentation here. But that means that was using same characteristics that P25 was using, which I was 100% familiar with. So I did a video called Digital and Analog Together Forever, where I basically took a FT270, which was a VHF FM handheld, took a VXR, Vertex VXR 1000 VHF analog mobile repeater. It's a little black box that interface radio to make kind of a mobile repeater on there that went into my FTM 400. And my FTM 400 then went into a Wires X node. And in the video that I did on YouTube, before YouTube was this what it is today, we'll use that term lightly, and I was able to demonstrate that it worked going in from analog, crossing over to digital, going down Wires X, and then coming back down digital, down Wires X, and crossing back over to analog. That caught someone's eye. And then all of a sudden, Yaesu kind of said, hey, are you interested in coming to work for us? Now, I was in the public safety realm as a two-way radio technician also at the time. And I was kind of like, well, what do I got to do? Well, I got to play with amateur radios. Okay. I have to educate amateur radios. I do have to sell them, but not like as like a salesperson, but like help promote education, go to store events, that kind of thing, be more education for the sale. And I said, do I have to get called out at 3 a.m. when the dispatcher who doesn't work magically cuts the mic cord and I get called out at 3 a.m.? And it says, no, you don't have to do any of that. And I'm like, okay, so I don't have to get called out at 3 a.m. Fine, sold. I'm there. So that's kind of how I started with Yaesu. And that's kind of how I come into this thing on there. One of the other things I want to kind of preface this with is, yes, I work for Yaesu. Yes, Yaesu has Yaesu System Fusion, but I run personally with my group in Wisconsin here. I run it through what I created called a Do Now Network, which is the digital user network of Wisconsin, where we take every single digital mode and cross it over to all the other digital modes. So that way we can have a cohesive cross platform to communicate and use it for emergency purposes and whatever. So for tonight, we're going to cover three main points as part of this presentation. The first one is going to be covering what is Yaesu System Fusion as compared to other modes. Once again, we ask that question a lot, get asked that question a lot. What is it? Why is Fusion better? Why should I choose Fusion over anything else? DMR, D-Star, P25, anything like that on there. So that's going to be one of our first segments. The second segment is going to be means of linking or connecting repeaters or other Fusion users. So how does Fusion connect? How does it link? And this is one of the reasons I personally like Fusion is because of the flexibility and versatility that allows it to operate in that regards. And then the third and final point we're going to talk about is the Yaesu System Fusion, like the origins, the growth, where we're headed on there with System Fusion as a digital voice technology. So with that, driving in, Yaesu System Fusion is C4FM and FDMA, and how is it compared to other modes? So first of all, Yaesu System Fusion uses C4FM. C4FM stands for Continuous 4-Frequency Modulation. C4FM, if you look into the digital aspect of things, is actually a form of frequency shift keying. Now, it's kind of funny that, and I stress this on there, because 4-frequency shift keying is actually the basis of DMR. But what ended up happening is that when C4FM was being designed, coming to fruition in the United States, there was a organization called APCO, which is Association of Professional Communication Officers, which is public safety dispatchers, workers, those kind of things like that. They came up with a standard, and that standard that is now known as P25 or APCO 25 said digital voice has to meet these requirements. C4FM was basically pulled out of 4-frequency shift keying as a means of communication that was a little bit cleaner in the way that it handled the processing of it. For reference, the C4FM is if we take a baseline, right? If we draw a line from the left to right across the center of the page. In C4FM, what we're doing is we're taking two audio reference points at a positive and then a negative. So let's say we're using 900 hertz and then 2700 hertz. Well, then there's going to be a negative 900 hertz and a negative 2700 hertz. What happens in that case is that you will then see that when your audio, my analog voice comes in, that vocoder is going to go and mix your audio between those 4-frequency points. So therefore, and in that case, what you have happening then is that is going to take and say, okay, wait a minute here. Here's what we got going on. Now we're going and saying, this is mixing it. Now, when it mixes with those 4 points, it creates a series of ones and zeros. Those ones and zeros are then packed into a format, and then that format is then set out as digital data over the voice. That is digital voice in essence, right? More so the C4FM aspect of it. Now, it uses a data rate of 9,600 bauds per second, or sometimes you'll hear 9,600 baud, or they'll hear 9,600 bits. Some people say it a different way. But what that is the data, the data speed of there. So when you're talking digital voice with C4FM, in particular, Yaesu System Fusion, and sort of P25, that's when you go ahead and you have that mixture at that data stream. If we were to take and measure that speed of it, it'd be there. Now, a lot of people are like, well, 9,600 baud, what is that? Well, think of it as the alternate packet. If you remember back in the day, or even APRS, there was 1,200 baud, and then there was 9,600 baud on there. So those are the two kinds of aspects of packet on there. Now, as it states in there, P25 or APCO 25 also uses C4FM and FDMA as their voice kind of format. And I'm going to cover that in just a minute coming up here. I just want to get through some of the understanding of Fusion on there. Yaesu System Fusion uses C4FM as FDMA, as we feel that is the highest quality of digital voice that can be provided out there. Now, when you talk to digital voice, you're going to hear two things. Someone will say FDMA, and then someone will say TDMA. So FDMA is frequency division multiple access. And what that does is it says, how is the signal going to travel on the frequency? Is it going to travel like it's a road, like we're putting a car down the road, and the car in this case per se is that digital data? Or are we going to use TDMA, which is what like DMR uses? And TDMA says, I'm not going to worry about the road as a frequency. I'm going to worry about being able to put the bumper of one car to the bumper of the other car so that all the cars have enough spacing on going down the road. I don't care if it's a lane. I want to know how many cars I can fit into that lane. Now, there's two schools of thought. Time division, TDMA, multiple access, that's what TDMA stands for, has to have timing on there. There is some documentation that shows that if you cannot reach that timing sequence, the further you get away from a repeater, the further you get away from that other station, you're going to lose sync, and then your digital voice is going to either get super garbled, and it's going to be the kind of like that, or you're just going to completely lose sync and you won't be able to communicate with one another in TDMA. FDMA, in other words, is saying, well, since you're dividing it as lanes, we can make sure that we're pumping down that slice of the frequency, which means that there's going to be less errors, which means that you could put forward error correction down there. And it's not time slots where something is receiving, not receiving, receiving, not receiving, receiving, not receiving. So that's kind of why we chose FDMA on there. In addition, C4FM and FDMA was being used by APCO. APCO, or P25 digital voice technology, came out long before. We're talking about 14 to 15 years before we ever had this idea for Fusion on there. So just to keep that kind of in your mind on there. Here is an example of what we do with our digital voice or digital data down the things on there. So one of the advantages that a lot of people use about digital is that it can reduce the frequency bandwidth, right? Most analog repeaters, even back in the commercial days and stuff like that, were what they call wideband. And wideband meant that it was a 25 kilohertz bandwidth for that frequency to travel. So from the center of that frequency, 12.5 kilohertz on each side of bandwidth on that frequency needed to be clean. Otherwise, you're going to have interference. Instantly with digital, you can instantly whack that in half. And now that 25 kilohertz becomes 12.5 kilohertz. Now, why would you do that? Well, you do that because now what a normal, quote, analog wideband repeater frequency would be can now be two digital voice repeater frequencies, or two frequencies used for digital voice, because remember, we're only using half of what we normally would have to. So as you see here with FDMA, you now go ahead and see the aspect of saying that, okay, guess what? It is now set up there on it so that you can take and basically divide it into those lanes. On the left-hand side, we have one of the modes we use, which is called DN. DN stands for digital narrow. So if you have a Fusion radio and you're talking on digital, it will pop up as the word DN or the letters DN. That means digital narrow. And what we're doing here is, as that picture shows, we take a 12.5 kilohertz bandwidth and we divide it literally in half, 6.25 and 6.25 equaling 12.5. What we do down that thing is we're going to put your voice down 6.25 kilohertz of bandwidth. So now with digital, we've compressed your voice by twice the normal bandwidth that analog would do. Now, what we can do on that other side of that 12.5, that other 6.25, we can send things such as GPS data. We can send forward error correctioning. We can send a data segment or sequence when my radio is transmitting to your radio to saying that, hey, you're listening to John's signal, N9UPC signal. Okay, hey, I might be getting into the fringe. Well, on the same side or the same frequency, in essence, we have a different road or a different path coming into that radio saying, okay, no, wait, here's the forward air correction. Here's what it is. Here's what it is. So what you tend to see with digital is you tend to see where analog will slowly decrease on a kind of a 45-degree angle in audio quality and clarity as you move further away from the station. Digital will do more of a plateau effect where it holds it, and then it takes a steep, sharp drop off on that plateau, and then it goes away. That is what we call our DN mode. Now, we have VW mode. VW mode stands for voice wide mode. And what we did in this case was we said we want to give you the highest audio quality, the highest audio fidelity, if we can say that, and saying we're going to put your voice down the full 12.5 kilohertz bandwidth of that frequency. We're not going to compress it down to 6.25. We're going to let it be nice and big. However, we're not going to be able to send all that data down like we did before. So you're not going to have the GPS coordinates. You're not going to have as much forward air correction as you would normally on there when you're using DN. However, some people say the voice quality on voice wide is a lot better. It's more rich or robust. Once again, it's kind of a personal preference, to be perfectly honest with you on there. I guess I can even go ahead and make it. Some people are like, well, really, is there a noticeable difference between DN and VW? And I tell people, I said, think of it this way. Why are there so many different headset or headphone manufacturers out there? Why are they so expensive? Because it's going to be personal preference, how people's audio ranges in their ears and their abilities will go ahead and do it. Now, the final mode that we have on there is DW mode. Now, this is not a selectable mode by you as the user individual. It is selected or utilized by the radio when a transmission requires data only and no voice. What this is going to be is like if you handshake with a Wires X node, if you send a text message, if you send a picture, if you send an audio file like you're uploading it to a Wires X node or something like that, that is going to go to DW mode, data wide mode. Now, one of the things I want to preface this and stress on there is when you're using DW mode, data wide mode, or VW mode, voice wide mode, your range can be decreased. Because once again, unlike DN mode, you don't have forward air correction. You don't have a data stream that's running in conjunction with the voice stream on there. So those are the different modes for Yaesu System Fusion. Now, let's talk about the different of the technology modes. What you need in every digital radio is what we call a vocoder. All righty. Now, vocoders can be a physical chip. Vocoders could be software now because we come to that technology. But basically what the concept of a voice coder is, it stands for voice encoder decoder, hence vocoder. Now, what that does is a lot of the ones out there, like for Yaesu System Fusion, they use the AMB+2 version. That's going to be for DMR, P25, NextDen, D-Star, all those on there. They use a vocoder chip. M17 doesn't use that vocoder chip on there, but they do have software that acts as a vocoder. There has to be some sort of chip or software within the radio that translates, that turns your analog voice in data, right? That it has to happen. There has to be some sort of conversion on there. Otherwise, it'd be like us going and saying, well, I want to talk data. And I go up to a person and I'm just like, no, that's not data, right? It's not ones and zeros. That's a sound. It's not actual data. Now, digital voice modulations that are out there are C4FM, 4FSK, and GMSK. Now, that is the modulation. Think of that as like your AM, your FM, your single sideband. That's the modulation that your voice data is going to take on there. Now there's frequency access type. We've kind of touched about that, where that's that FDMA slicing the frequency like a road. And then you have TDMA, where it's how many cars I could put back to back on there. Now, for Fusion, for P25, it is C4FM and FDMA. For DMR, it is 4FSK and TDMA. For NextDen, if you're familiar with NextDen, that is technically C4FM and FDMA. If you're familiar with D-Star, that is actually GMSK and FDMA. If you're familiar with M17, M17 is sort of like a 4FSK variant kind of on there, and that uses FDMA. As you see, every digital voice technology out there uses some sort of digital voice modulation, and then they have to determine how they send it down the path of the frequency on there. Now, there are other digital modes that are out there. There is Tetra and all those kind of things. Not an amateur application in the US. I say that because it's used in other countries. Some people are doing it, played with it a little bit. It's kind of cool. But it's not there. So we're not even going to go ahead and touch on that. Yaesu System Fusion chose that C4FM, that FDMA, because it gives the highest audio quality, the highest audio response, and the least amount of taking your voice and turning it from this into more of like a sound like this that digital can do on the recoding. So I mean, it's kind of exaggeration, but if your voice isn't packed correctly in going into a radio that's digital capable, the unpacking of it is going to make it sound horrible. And I have heard digital voice modes. I have heard that where it's a bad radio or a bad microphone going into the radio. And on the other end, they sound like this. And it's just like, that sounds actually horrible. And yeah, so that's why we chose C4FM and FDMA. Alrighty, let's talk about number 2, which is means of linking or connecting repeaters or other Fusion users together. So Yaesu System Fusion had a goal in mind, had a purpose. And the first purpose was to be high quality digital voice. Excuse me, I had to take a drink. High quality digital voice. The second had to be easy to use, had to be super simple, easy to use. If it's going to be confusing, there's no sense in doing it. And then the third and final part was versatility and flexibility, meaning I shouldn't have to depend on the internet to be able to use Fusion. I shouldn't have to be able to depend on this and this and this. If I want to talk simplex, I can talk simplex and I can do it easily. If I want to talk to a repeater, I can talk to a repeater, make it easily. If I want to talk through a gateway, through an internet connection based kind of situation, or ROIP, radio over IP kind of scenario, I should make it easy to do. And that's what Yaesu set out to do when we came up with Yaesu System Fusion. What we did is we came out and said, okay, there's going to be 3 layers of Fusion. There's going to be the user layer. That is you as the end user using handhelds. I got radios all over the place here. So like this is me. I'm using my handheld on Fusion. That's the first layer. The second layer was going to be infrastructure. And if I wasn't embarrassed by how dirty my shack is here, I would go and show you. I have a repeater right sitting here next to me on the bench, where I do testing and work with the people in the office here in California. But that was the next infrastructure, was what we call infrastructure layer. So those are repeaters. Those are your standalone WiresX nodes. All right. And then the third layer was the networking layer. And what that meant is that how we can go ahead and connect the two stations, the two things together. Now, what's unique about this concept is it's not a 1, 2, 3, as in like it goes up. Like you need to have 2 in order to have 3 or 1 to have 2. No, you don't. What it is think of it more of a triangle. And if we think of it more like a triangle, it's like I make a triangle with my fingers here. What the triangle aspect of is like we have the peak of the triangle, which is your users. Now, your users can go to infrastructure, or it can go down to internet connectivity, or the in connectivity aspect of it, the internet portion of it, WiresX, those kind of things. But it didn't require one or the other. So you don't need to go through a repeater to use WiresX. You don't have to have a repeater or WiresX on a repeater to use that repeater. They're all standalone and different on there. And that's where it kind of comes into how Fusion was unique in that. In addition, when Fusion first came out, you could not link a repeater to a WiresX node. Could not be done. Repeaters were separate, and then the WiresX nodes are separate. Hence why the triangle happened between the second and the third layers of infrastructure. That was kind of due to something interesting, kind of a tidbit note that maybe people didn't aware. But even to this day, using C4FM FDMA, quote, Yaesu System Fusion, in a repeated voice format is illegal in Japan. You cannot use Yaesu System Fusion as a digital voice mode on a repeater. Now you could use it in simplex. You can use it through wires X nodes, but you can't use it together as a repeater. That is initially why we couldn't allow wires X nodes to be linked to repeaters. We didn't want to do that because there would be the concern of like, well, someone could set up a repeater, that would be problematic for Japan and stuff. So that's initially why that didn't happen. However, us in America, people were using the Yaesu System Fusion. Says, how are we supposed to link repeaters? It's great that I could talk to Bill locally here that's, 10 miles apart, but I want to talk to my dad that's 100 miles away from me. Well, I can't talk through my repeater now. I could do it with my analog repeater because that's all linked. How can we do that? So we changed that about 2014, and I'll cover that in a little bit here. But linking Fusion is easy to link. You don't have to worry about talk groups, time slots, color codes, NAC codes, RAN codes, call sign routing, nothing like that whatsoever. That's what makes it so great about Fusion. In this example I have on the screen here, I have a donor radio connected to the HRI 200. All I have to do now is just take my Fusion radio here, and I just put it on the frequency of the donor radio. I key up and it's like, hey, this is a N9UPC. Now I'm going from my handheld into the donor radio, into the Wires X network, and wherever I have my Wires X node connected. Don't have to do anything like that. Once again, no talk group, no time slots, no color codes, no call sign routing, nothing like that. That is problematic on all the other modes. But as Billy Mays used to say, wait, there's more. So now what we did is when we came out with the DR2X repeater, we went along and we found out something that people were complaining about. And people were complaining about and saying, John, if I need to use Wires X, I have to have the internet, correct? Yes, you do. Okay, now I need to go ahead and have certain ports open if I want to connect on Wires X. Is that correct? Yes, it is. Now I have to have a global non-NATed IP address for my HRI 200 if I want to use it like a room. Yes, I don't want that. I want to be able to link my repeaters and not have to use the internet. Or more so, we had customers saying, hey, John, at my tower site, they will not let the internet pass through the walls of the building, right? There's no internet in there whatsoever. Or they're not going to allow the internet to even be have a cellular modem in there. Some places are like that. Government facilities especially are like that. So with the DR2X, we came out with what we call the IMRS board. And that IMRS board allows you to take the data and IP packet data coming out of the back of that DR2X and send it for digital voice only now, not analog, but digital voice only, send it down via intranet, via internet, or anything that can pass IP data traffic, and then make an established connection between 2 repeaters, 3 repeaters, 4, 5, 6, up to 99 different repeaters. That's what IMRS did. So now you have the ability at the network connectivity level, the network level. Now you can use Wires X or you can use the repeaters. Once again, Wires X doesn't need to be connected to repeaters. You can use Wires X by itself. The repeaters now could even link without needing to be used with Wires X. So now you really, in essence, have that triangle. I have the users at the peak, and now the users get to choose which way they go on there. But once again, because of the simplicity of our technology, it was even able to do this, which is create a system of systems. You don't see this with any other digital voice technology out there. What does this mean? What does this picture represent? Okay, what the picture does on the left-hand side is you see 3 DR2X repeaters tied together using the IMRS functionality. Okay, that IMRS functionality, like I said, is coming data card built into the repeater in there, and any digital voice coming into the repeater gets put into IP data packets, and then with IP addressing, you tell it to, okay, hey, repeater A, when this person's using it with this situation, you're going to go to repeater B and repeater C. Okay, repeater B, when someone comes in with this signal, you're only going to go to A, or you're only going to go to C, or whatever the configuration is on there. All righty. But what you also see on there is you see our good old buddy Wires X. Now, Wires X can talk into one of the IMRS linked repeaters. And now the Wires X feed comes in from Wires X, feeds that repeater A in this example, and then that repeater A sends it out via IMRS down to all the other repeaters. Now, the reason I say it's a system of systems, because now let's say for you saying, you know what, that John, he's a pretty nice guy. We like him. Okay. Hey, I understand he's got a whole linked repeater system in Wisconsin. So day in and day out, I'm chatting here locally on my repeaters and we're having a good old time and blah, 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 blah. Now all of a sudden we want to join your group. So now all I have to do is out of my IMRS linked repeaters, I use one Wires X node to connect to one of them, which feeds them all. My Wires X node connects to your Wires X node. So now, yes, we are bridging using Wires X, but then once it leaves our Wires X node, goes via RF and our repeaters, now it's going on our IMRS network. And literally then we have a system of systems. We have two standalone separate IMRS repeater systems, and then establishing a Wires X link. Now you've linked your IMRS repeater system with my IMRS repeater system. And by the way, it's not just one. We can connect into a room, and that room can each have 5 nodes or more in there. Let's just say there's 5 other nodes besides our 2. That means 7 nodes. And let's say those 7 nodes each connect out to their own IMRS system on there. We could literally have 7 different IMRS repeater nodes all connected together that quickly. Now, why is this different? Why are you saying this is other ones? So you can't do that with P25. You can't do that with DMR because DMR there's no way to set up a node that just feeds it on there, right? When you connect with DMR is done at the repeater level, and then that talk group is routed on that time slot out to the other things like that on there, right? And then with D-Star all has to be through call sign routing. So you can't have a D-Star radio feed into that. The repeater has to be connected directly to a network, and it goes from there. So that's where Fusion can link things together via RF with no difficulties and no problems whatsoever. Now, before we go any further, I kind of touched on it, but some people do is, what is the difference between Yaesu System Fusion and Wires X? The difference is that Yaesu System Fusion, the reason it's called Yaesu System Fusion is because our network is designed to operate in a mode that no other networks can. You can either set your repeater or your radios up to be digital only. You could set it up to be FM only, or you could set it up to be mixed mode, which means if it hears digital, it goes out digital, hears FM, it goes out FM. Or you can set it up AMS received, fixed mode out, meaning it hears analog or digital, and you could force it out FM, or it hears analog or digital, and you force it out digital. Only technology in the world right now that can do that. You can't have that mixed mode aspect on there. None of the other systems, none of the other technologies allow you to do that. But that is why we call it Yaesu System Fusion, because it's fusing analog and digital users together. But that Yaesu System Fusion, that C4FM FDMA, is what we would kind of call almost that common air interface, meaning the protocol, the data set, the data stream, everything like that. That is what is being sent out over the air. Wires X is a means of using Yaesu System Fusion or analog voice to connect at a network type layer, using the internet. Once again, Wires X is separate from Fusion. Fusion is separate from Wires X. You don't have to have a Wires X node to use Fusion. Likewise, you don't have to use Fusion to use Wires X. It can be analog on there. Once again, sorry, my voice is kind of crackly tonight. All right, let's talk real quick about Yaesu System Fusion, the origins, the growth, the future. So Yaesu System Fusion was actually introduced to the masses in 2013. Dennis Matzenbacher, K7BV, who was our vice president at the time, he has become a silent key. We were very sad about that. Dennis was a very big inspiration to me. He was the one that recruited me from Yaesu. He was up actually at the Tapper conference that was being held up in Washington. And the conference was in its final wrap-up thing on there. And they said, hey, we have a special guest we want to do. We want to invite Dennis Matzenbacher from Yaesu, and he's going to be talking about something that no one is aware of and no one heard about. And he came out and he introduced Yaesu System Fusion to the masses. Now, people are saying, well, 2013, that was kind of late to the market, isn't it? Wasn't D-Star out there? Wasn't DMR out there at that time? Excuse me. And yes, the answer is yes, they were. But the reason we didn't introduce it before 2013 was, if you remember, Yaesu was part of a multi company. So we were Yaesu on amateur and aviation. We were Vertex Standard on our commercial LMR side, and we were Horizon Marine on our marine side. All of them were under one roof, right? Each division was different. If you remember, actually, that was a time when our radios would have the model number of a VX, like there'd be a VX1, VX2, VX150, whatever. Because at that point in time, we were making radios under the Vertex Standard line on there, even though it was part of Yaesu. The model numbers corresponded with that. Well, what happened was we started coming up with Yaesu System Fusion at that time in 2010. But what happened was that we went and, as a public safety division, Vertex Standard went in and made a very big sale into the New York Port Authority. And at that time, there was another radio company, which we won't say names, but it begins with M and ends in Motorola, that went along and was very upset that who's this Vertex Standard? Who are they taking away? New York. We've had New York the whole time, and and now all of a sudden they're coming in and taking care of New York Port Authority. And as a matter of fact, if you actually watch some Hollywood movies, reminiscence of the time, you'll actually see they have actual Vertex Standard radios that the officers and stuff were carrying in them, because at the time, New York Port Authority and New York authorities had Vertex radios. What they did was they didn't like that. So this company came in and said, we want to buy your company. And so we were like, okay, fine, let's buy us. And then what happened was Motorola came and they took us over and everything. They didn't care about the amateur line. They didn't really care about marine. They didn't care about aviation, but they wanted the public safety line. And what ended up happening was back in 2012, then, about 2 years later, we bought ourselves back. We bought ourselves for marine, amateur, and aviation. They kept the LMR division on there. That's why if you're a Motorola buff or you're up on commercial radios and stuff like that, you'll see the VX line or the Vertex Standard line or the EVX line, because Motorola owns the Vertex line. But we are Yaesu for amateur and aviation and Standard Horizon for marine. Now, what happened was that when that time that we were kind of briefly owned by Motorola per se, there was really no projects going forward. Fusion was put on hold. Finally, we bought ourselves back. We said, this needs to come to the drawing board. This needs to come out and stuff. Finally, it was saying, okay, we got it on paper. Let's push it out. Let's get it on there. 2013, Fusion was introduced. Now, at that time, what is now known as Yaesu System Fusion, not Yaesu System Fusion 2, which we're in, which is kind of the second generation, you had the FT1, you had the FTM 400, you had the FT991, and you had the DR1X repeater. You had Wires X connections, but that was not linking through repeaters. They were all standalone. That was the first product line that came out for Yaesu System Fusion. At that time, it also had a DSQ type signaling. So almost like a DSC type marine calling, where what you could do is you could select one of the DSQ codes, and I would only be able to hear you if you use that DSC code, or that DSQ code, excuse me. But then if I needed to, I could switch to break mode and I could key up and I would open up everybody's DSQ calls, much like marine signaling, so everybody could hear me if I had an emergency message or something I had to go through. Well, now what ended up happening is that was how it was working. And as time progressed, we come up to 2017 when Yaesu System Fusion 2 was released. All the advancements of Yaesu System Fusion 2 were done through firmware for all models. None of the older models any of the Fusion models were saying, oh, no, too bad, so sad. Like other companies that said, yeah, you can't upgrade it, it's dead, don't worry about it, that kind of thing. No, we didn't. And this is quite remarkable because now what we did is we had a series of handhelds. Now we had the FT1, the FT1 XD, the FT2, the FT70, we had the FTM 400, the FTM 400 XD, excuse me, the FTM 100, the FTM 3200, 3207, 7250. We still had the 991A, and now we had the DR1X, DR1XFR, and DR2X repeaters, in addition to Wires X for their functionality. Now, what we did is we changed a few things on there, laying the groundwork for this IMRS board technology. And what we did is we changed that DSQ signaling to what we call DGID. And DGID, which is what we have today, think of it per se as like the CTCSS of digital. Now, digital is ones and zeros. CTCSS and DCS are all sine waves, right? One's a sine wave, one's a square wave, okay? You can't put a wave into a digital voice. It doesn't work that way, right? So DGID acts as sort of that functionality. You have, in essence, 99 DGID codes that can be used, and then you have 00, which is like it's turned off. Now, of those different 99, you have 01 through 02, 03, 04, all the way up to 99. They could be set up to transmit it, but not receive it. They could be set up to no transmit, but to receive, or they could set up to transmit and receive, or they could set up to split transmit and receive. So transmit 10, listen on 99. This is an example. That, once again, is related to like a CTCSS tone. You know, on your radios, you can have set it to transmit a tone, no receive, no transmit, but receive, or transmit and receive. So there's kind of that functionality on there. That's what the biggest change was for Yaesu System Fusion 2. Now, to 2018, Wires X took a major jump. What we did is we heard people saying, you know what, John, Wires X doesn't work if I'm away from my house. There's nothing portable about Wires X. And I fell into that same thing too, because when I traveled to the office of California, I couldn't bring my Wires X node. If I wanted to be able to talk back to my home here in Wisconsin, I had to find a local Wires X node in California saying, hey, can I use this to call home and switch to a different room? And some people would say, yeah, sure, no problem, John. For Yaesu, no problem. And other people would be like, no, too bad, deal with it. You should have thought about something better. And we're like, okay, sorry. So we came up with this combination. So now with this advancement, and actually in 2014, little tidbit, we switched it. So now you could use Wires X with a repeater. Now you could have an HRI 200 with that donor radio. Kind of showed that picture on there. It's a mobile radio put into Wires X mode, turns off the internal brains of the radio, connects to the HRI 200. You use the Wires X software to control the radio. Then you could do the HRI 200 plus the repeater. So you can physically connect that HRI 200 to a DR1X, DR1XFR, DR2X. Now what we release is what we call PDN functionality. So there's PDN functionality, and then there's HRI functionality. Each one of them has direct, and each one of them has access point. What in essence direct means is that I can take my radio and PDN direct or HRI direct, take my microphone here I have in my hand, plugged into the radio, and use my microphone or use the speaker on the radio. Does not transmit RF, but goes into this computer with cables, and then that goes down the Wires X network. Now, access point is the same thing, but a little different in that you have that radio, and I can't even find my radio here. You have that radio set up in PDN, but now I'm going to use a digital radio to talk from it in digital to that radio. That radio is going to receive it, send it to Wires X network. And then if it comes back from the Wires X network, it's going to transmit it out to my radio. Now, there's PDN and HRI. Well, what are the difference? So PDN allows you to only connect to other digital only nodes or rooms. You can't connect to anybody that's running an analog room. There are some people on the Wires X network that run analog or have mixed mode, meaning analog and digital are in that room together. The HRI mode allows you to connect to digital or analog rooms or digital only rooms. So you have that flexibility of how you want to connect on there. That's what the little stars by the PDN direct and PDN access point are, meaning that you can only connect to digital only rooms. Now, the great thing about doing this upgrade with Wires X is that it opened up a slew of radios that you could do with it, right? It's not one simple radio. It's not one simple little thing that, oh, I can only do this or I can only do this with it. No, What it basically boils down to is saying, okay, I got my handheld here right now. If I want to, I can plug my handheld into my computer, and now I'm talking down wires X. But hey, I'm going to go outside, and I don't want to talk on wires X anymore. I want to talk a local repeater. I unplug the handheld, and I can go with it. So you can do the PDN functionality on the FT2, the FT3, the FT5, the FTM 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, and 510, all with a cabling kit running the free Wires X software. Now, people are going to go saying, like, why did Fusion? Why is Fusion growing? Why is it what it's at? Well, the Fusion is growing, and it is considered one of the most popular digital voice modes around in the world. Now, we have a double asterisk by that because some people argue that point. They're saying there's a lot more DMR repeaters than there are Fusion repeaters in my state or my community or everything like that. Actually, infrastructure versus actually what is being used on devices is a lot different. Give you an example. I don't know how many may have a hotspot, a Zoom spot, an open spot, whatever like spot type device you have. Fusion is the number one voice mode that is used from a lot of those devices to go down in a network. More people are buying a Fusion handheld and buying a little hotspot node, whatever, Zoom spot, whatever, and going from their handheld over the air to that node in Fusion, and then going out to DMR or going out to P25 or going out to the other modes, which I absolutely find hilarious, being that Fusion is so popular and so easy, people use it to get onto the other modes instead of saying, you know what, I'm going to buy myself a DMR handheld and I'm going to get my Zoom spot or hotspot set up and I'm going to talk DMR via RF and then go down to the network talking on DMR. Yeah, it's not. Product line is in active research and development. We have had some of those models. Some of those models have ended production on there, but we do have more stuff that is coming out. I can't really, and I'm not at liberty to really talk about it and say that on there. That's part of the requirements of the job. But I will tell you some really good things are coming down the line. If you see me do any videos and stuff like that with these YouTubers and stuff like that on there, you'll hear me saying, I can't say something, but good things are coming. Good things are coming. People usually don't believe me, and then guess what happens? Good things are coming. From the amateur side of things, of how amateur works, Fusion was designed for amateur. You actually transmit your call sign in digital every single time you do it. That's why the first time you have to enter your call sign out there. It has that high quality digital voice. It is one of the easiest modes to learn without a learning curve. The first time you buy a Fusion radio and turn it on, you have to enter your call sign. The next time you want to talk on digital, you go ahead on the 70 here, you push the little mode button right there, and then it'll say DN or VW, key up. Now you're talking in digital. Want to go back to FM, you hit mode, say FM on there. Now you're back on FM. That's it. That is it. That's all you have to do to do it. One of the few modes that can link via RF. Once again, talk to some of the other modes, can't link via RF. And then the mode is designed, once again, as we talked about, to operate in standalone or linked or a ton of different other Yaesu System Fusion configurations that are really out there. The technology is really designed for the user to go with it. And that's where we see the future of Yaesu System Fusion going, is to once again keep it as an open means of how you want. If you want your repeater connected to a Wires X node, you don't have to stay connected to a Wires X node. You can have it set up that, hey, I can control my Wires X node via my handheld here, and I just want to talk locally, but hey, we got a net and I want to join a different room or something like that. Boom, I can remotely control the node from my handheld. Boom, now the repeater connects to it. It's good, it's there, and then it times out after a bit, or I move it or change it or do whatever I want. That is where the future of Yaesu System Fusion is heading. Is there going to be a change in the protocol? Probably not. Fusion, despite what some people say, is actually an open voice protocol. It is published out there. You can find it in numerous places. We, Yaesu, even published a white paper that told you every single frame, bit rate, everything like that can go ahead and what you need to build a Yaesu System Fusion radio and operate in a frame patterns. And I'll even go one step further here and show how much of it is. If Fusion was a proprietary technology, I guarantee you half these different hotspot, Zoom spots, all that kind of stuff. The reverse engineering that was done on the Fusion protocol, if any of that was actually proprietary and we didn't want it out, guess what? We're a big company. We would have been suing these people. Okay. So that just even goes ahead and shows that it is an open voice technology that can be implemented on there. All righty. That's me rambling on enough on there. Thank you for letting me come in and talk. I'm going to take a moment here to get some water, and then I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen here and then allow everybody to go ahead and do some question and answering. One of the things I do want to go ahead and say is we are on social media. Visit our Yaesu.com website. It's a redesigned website. It's a lot better, nicer looking website, in my opinion. We do have a YouTube channel, Yaesu USA Official. We do have the Yaesu USA podcast, which are on Podbean. We took a little hiatus for a little bit on there to do some things that we needed to do in the background. And now we're going to start doing them again on there. But do visit us on social media, those kind of things like that on there. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am not sure who will pick it up.
John, that was a lot of information. I want to thank you for talking with us tonight. I learned quite a bit. If anybody has questions, you can either, I don't know what the easiest way to do this. We got actually quite a few people in here tonight. There is one question that John Draper put in the chat, and that was asking if his 991A right now, right out of the box, can do what we've been talking about, the C4 FM, or does it need a software update? Are you able to elaborate on that?
Yes. So unlike other brands and stuff like that, if our radio says that it is Yaesu System Fusion, it is capable. You don't have to buy a board. You don't have to do an add-on. You don't have to do anything like that whatsoever. If it does say it's capable of Fusion C4 FM, that is straight right out of the box. There is no upgrades or anything you need to do on it.
Okay, beautiful. Anybody else have questions? Feel free to either drop them in the chat or just start talking, and we'll figure it out if it gets a little disorganized. Anybody else have questions? Anybody?
Yeah. I got one that touches on what he just said. So if it's right out of the box says System Fusion, can you, if your radio doesn't say, like I've got a DX10, is there something that I could add on later to make it to where I could do Fusion?
No, that's a very good question. We actually get that asked a lot. If it's not a System Fusion capable radio, then there's no add-on to make it System Fusion at all. We do kind of have that set up as that different product line on there. Mainly, lots of times when you see a radio or device that is not System Fusion capable, there's something else in there that we did that. So for example, with the FTDX for HF radios, like the FTDX 101, the FTDX 10, the FT 710, they are not capable of Yaesu System Fusion, but the FT 991 is. That kind of deals with what we did and how those radios are set up. So the 101, the 10, the 710, they're all SDR hybrid kind of technologies on there. A lot of the audio stuff that Fusion would need to utilize is used for the other aspects of non-Fusion aspects on there. We wanted to make a high quality HF radios on there. But like, for example, our new FTX1, that is System Fusion capable on their radio on there. And then the FT981. Those are the only two currently on the market that do Yaesu System Fusion and are also HF capable.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Steve.
Two questions, actually. I'm very new to Fusion.
Mm-hmm.
Just a few. And so what's the HR 200? Is that something that I would want to have as a user if I have RF connection to a Fusion repeater that does have wire X on it?
Very good question. So that's going to come down to personal preference. And here's why I say that. So if you have access to a repeater that already has wires X in there, you are kind of per se at the mercy of the repeater trustee owner and that who's running the node. So maybe they want to use wires X to always stay connected to a certain room or to a certain other repeater on there. Some may allow you to disconnect that repeater from that room or that other connection there and then move it to a different connection. So let's say, for example, let's say your repeater you have local access to is connected to the, let's call it the Las Vegas room for argument's sake, right? But let's say, what, I want to disconnect. I want to go over to John's room. Okay. Remember, with the way Fusion works is that there's one conversation. There's only one voice path on there. So if you're disconnecting it from the Las Vegas room and you're taking that repeater with wires X and connecting it to my room, anybody that uses that repeater is going to hear the traffic coming from my room. Now, with that being said, that's where I said it's going to be up to you, is if you want to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to leave that repeater connected to whatever, but maybe I want to go to John's room, or maybe I want to do this, or better yet, which we have a lot of people do. Hey, our local repeater has a wires X connection, and it happens a lot up here in Wisconsin. I'm going to go down south for the winter, but I still want to talk back to everybody up here. So I'm going to take my wires X node with me, and now I can talk in locally and go back. Now, that's part two of the question. Part one, do you need an HRI 200? The actual answer is no. You only need an HRI 200 if, one, you plan on hosting your own room, and two, if you want to use FM via the RF path. So in other words, if you're saying, I don't have another digital radio, I want to talk from my handheld, which is analog, into my node, which is analog, and then convert it over to digital and send it down the wires X network, that is when you'll need the HRI 200. Or once again, hosting a room. If you're not going to do any of those two things, you can easily go ahead and just use the PDN functionality on there. And right now it works with the FT5 handheld as a current production radio, or works with the FTM 510 or those other version models that are no longer in production.
Okay, and I think you answered my question. You can only be in one group at a time.
Correct. It's basically that one, as we kind of say, one talk path on there. So if you're going into that repeater, everybody that hears that repeater is subject to whatever is being received by that wires X node. You can't separate them out or anything like that on there.
So I'm taking everybody that was on that repeater into that room?
Correct.
Okay, and the repeaters typically have I guess I'll call it a default group for their local repeater.
Yeah, the majority of people do. Wires X has a function in the software that it will fall back to a certain room or node or something. So, for example, my personal wires X node here, it goes back to my do now room. My room is 21667. So, for some reason, my node becomes disconnected. If my computer needs to do an update and reboots, or I disconnected for some reason, after it's disconnected and it sits idle for a short period of time, and we're talking like maybe 15, 20 seconds, it will say, oh, I'm not connected to anything. Let me fall back over to the room and I'm going to connect that way.
And to use the HR200, what else is required? You need a real radio that has ports on it, not a handheld?
Yes, correct. So let me grab my HRI 200 here real quick. So what you're going to need is, and once again, I apologize. So this is the HRI 200. I don't know if you can see it that well on there.
Yeah.
This is the little box here. It's about the size of my hand, a little bit less. On the back here, there are some ports. You're going to have to go ahead and take and plug the USB into the computer. And you're going to have to take this cable here, which is plugged into radio 1. And that will have to be plugged into, if you want to talk digital, a digital capable radio. So let me go ahead and take my test bench radio here. This is the FTM 510 here on it. But if you notice on the FTM 510 on the back there, there's that little data port on there. That cable coming off the HRI 200 is going to go right into that data port right there. You're going to then turn on the radio by holding the button combination on here, which is going to be power and then DX and GM. That will boot the radio up into a state where the radio is going to go ahead and saying, you know what, I'm not going to think for myself anymore. I'm just going to look for that HRI 200, and then I'm going to go do the job of what the HRI 200 tells me. And then that is what you would need to do the HRI 200. Mind you, when you have that, what we call the donor radio, and the reason we call it a donor radio is that when you have that connected to your HRI 200, nothing else is going to work. The microphone isn't going to work. It's not going to do anything. It's only going to listen to the audio coming in and out of that HRI 200. That's why we stress it's a donor radio. In addition, you need a PC always for Wires X. And if you're using the HRI 200, you have to have certain UDP ports open on your internet router with that global non-NATed IP address. So if you're using cell phone internet providers, or if you're using a mesh network or something, they may not give you those open IP address and UDP ports that you need. So that's why we tell people, if you're not going to host your own room, you're not going to do FM, just go the PDN route. It's a lot simpler. It's a lot easier.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Excellent presentation.
Thank you. One quick story, just a little funny. So one of the things I was tasked with was in 2018, we had a meeting and the owner flies over from Japan to the actual US office. And we were called there. We were all there for the meeting. And he goes, I got a great technology that we're going to do. We're going to be doing this. And then what he did is he explained it. So we announced it at Hamvention 2018 when we did our Yaesu System Fusion presentation. So what happened was when we announced it, we got feedback from customers. We took it back. We took it to R&D. And R&D and engineering says, okay, we got to try this and this and this and this. And they said, okay, when we send you the updates, John, I want you to go out and I want you to try it, because one of the cool things was anywhere you can get a wire in a Wi-Fi connection with your computer, you can use Wires X now. I said, okay, cool. Well, here I am waiting for my flight back from LAX to Minneapolis. And I'm from Wisconsin. I live in Wisconsin because I don't necessarily like the hot weather. LA is very hot, but it's not a wet hot. It's not a humid hot, whatever. I always yell to people in the office. No, that's hot is hot. So here I am sitting, waiting at LAX, waiting to board the plane. And I decide to saying, you know what better way to test this than the airport Wi-Fi, right? That is a true testament. If the airport Wi-Fi in its infinite wisdom, right, and abilities can do Wires X, would be great. Well, here I am, a relatively large guy, sweaty, hot from California weather, at the airport, past the gate, sitting, waiting at the gate to board my plane. And I'm pulling out this laptop with these cables that I kind of have here. This is just one of the cables that are the cables connected to my radio, which I'm talking on at the gate. Quickly, you become the subject matter of the LAX police and LAPD that happens to be at LAX, and they were wondering, what the hell are you doing? And my saving grace in the whole thing is that one of the officers happened to go ahead and be a Yaesu customer, and he was a ham and he knew about Yaesu products. And he was just like, oh, okay, cool. And I'm like, here's my card. I'm not a bad guy. Please don't put me on the no-fly list. And I explained to them what it was and kind of showed them like, oh, okay, that's fine. And everything like that on there. So quite an experience, but I think a testament how Wires X can work. I have had people tell me when I've, relayed that story to them, there's like, thank God you're like, the guy wasn't an ICOM fan or a Kenwood, because I might still be in jail today or something like that on there. So, but yes, Wires X can work anywhere.
Question, John. So, you were saying before about analog repeaters connecting with an HRI, and in the Wires X software, I see that there are digital rooms and analog connections, right?
Correct.
So, am I to understand you can connect an analog repeater or analog radio to an HRI and then connect to a Wires X room?
Yes, correct. Wires X was a play off of a continuation of our Wires 2 technology. So what you can do is actually, if you're not doing digital, you can actually interface any radio you want. You can just take the cord, make up your own connections into it. In the Wires X software, you can actually take and set, if your core value is active high versus active low, those kind of things like that, flat audio, modulated audio. You can do all that in a Wires X software just from your screen there. And yeah, you can. And then what you can do is you can take that analog repeater, goes into the HRI 200, which then goes to your obviously PC and into Wires X network. and your room has to be, or the room you're using has to be set up for mixed mode room. Okay. But then you can have digital users come in, could have analog users come in, and then yes, you can cross them all together. The only thing that I will stress on is digital to analog always sounds good. It sometimes will sound a little like flat like this almost, but it does sound pretty good. But the problem is if you have a weak signal, which normally analog might be, like a little bit like that, in digital, that sounds horrible. In digital, it's going to sound more like like kind of almost like it's digitalizing hash, right? On there. So just be careful, just be advised. You want to have a good, strong analog signal coming into there. Now, with that being said, the Wires X software actually has your own audio adjustment section in there. So if you have a Wires X open or you have the software open, if you actually go under File, and then you actually go under, I'm sorry, not File, but View, you can go under View. There's a little section that says Audio Adjustment. You actually can go in there and set the audio levels coming in to the Wires X node or going out of the Wires X node. And I will tell you this, I have a clean sounding node. I've had numerous people saying, John, I don't know what little Yaesu magic you have over all of us, but your Wires X audio is always amazing. Why is that? And I said, because I set the audio on there to do it. So yes, it is, the sky's the limit, but you got to play, king of the audio.
Okay. And so now if you have an HRI 2 on, let's say an FTM 300 connected to an HRI, and you dedicate a PC with Wires X software, you can host your own room, correct?
Correct. You just have to make sure you have that global non-NATed IP address. So basically an IP facing the world, and then the UDP ports open. Now, the reason why is I didn't explain it, but I will quickly here. Wires X is a decentralized network, meaning no rooms are hosted by Yaesu. Your HRI 200 acts as a mini server, as a mini room. So when you have that HRI 200 connected, that's why you have to open up those UDP ports for the internet, because every room that's hosted there. So like, for example, my room that I have 21667, right now I have 3 people in it. All 3 of those people are going through the internet, directly connecting to my internet, to my Wires X computer and node sitting right next to me. Well, right here, over here off to my right. Those are all physically connecting to there. You don't connect to a server and then go through there like other digital things. You have to connect to a server or reflector or anything like that. No. Wires X operates on the principle, and I'm gonna probably confuse some people, but it's sort of like AOL Instant Messenger. Wires X, you can go node to node, which is like Instant Messenger, or you can go into a chat room, which is in essence just what it is, a room where people can all congregate together.
Okay. And so I don't want to turn this into an IT Zoom meeting, but so you said the UDP port's not a problem. The other part, you said internet connection facing the world. Does that are you basically meaning a static IP?
No, it does not have. It does not have to be static. It just cannot be NATed. So, like, for some people that might be aware, like your cell phone on your internet provider, it's not a IP going out.
Okay, unnatted. Okay.
Yep, unnatted.
Interesting. Okay. Cool.
Is one last question for me. Is there a place where you can hear what you sound like when you transmit on digital, like a parrot room or something of that nature?
No, there's not. And the reason there's not is because, once again, like I said, in that Wires X software, there's that audio adjustment. So when you're actually doing your audio adjustment, when you're talking, you're going to hear yourself at that same time of how you sound. You're going to see that audio waveform and everything like that on there. So there's nothing in there because, once again, there's no server you're connecting to. You're just connecting to a room, which is at HRI 200.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for John? All right. Well, John, thank you very much for taking time out of your evening to talk with us tonight. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
If we can, I'd love to get a picture of everybody. So if you're okay with it, I know not everybody is, maybe whatever. If you want to, not unmute, what do you call it? Turn your camera on. I'm going to take a screenshot and I'll give you like 10 seconds. But if you don't turn your camera on, don't get upset with me when you're not in the picture. All right, I'm going to do the print screen.
How's my hair?
Looks great. There we go. Perfect. All right, I'll put that up on the Facebook and I'll drop it in Discord. But let me just get. I guess we can't really give you much of a round of applause, but you can see our hands moving. Thank you so much, John, for being here and helping us out tonight. Do appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. And, as I always tell people, like I said, part of my job is actually doing the education. That's why I do the podcast, the educational videos on our YouTube channel. If you ever have any other specific questions that more like you have a repeater group or a technical group or something like that, that you want to get involved in and do that, feel free to reach out to me via email. I've done numerous meetings, numerous presentations of different like, hey, John, can we do this? Can we make this work? How do we do this? As a matter of fact, I am actually leaving on Thursday to between Thursday and Tuesday of next week. I'm actually going to be talking to two other groups in person, and over the weekend, working with another group to actually get their repeater set up to link on analog and then link on digital. So I'm always out there to help and everything like that on there. Just give me a holler.
Just to clarify something, are there any other radios other than Yaesu that will transmit C4 FM?
No,
Okay.
no, there is not on there. We've always heard rumor that there has been, places that want to go ahead and do that on there. But unfortunately, no one wants to do that or pick that up or anything like that on there.
Has Yaesu then made this proprietary to Yaesu radios only then?
No, like I said, the actual protocol is out there. It's actually published on there. It is an open standard. The only thing is that what we based it on is using an actual vocoder. However, we have heard there are some people that are working with that to put it on like smartphone devices, those kind of things that don't require vocoder. And then once again, like I said, the people that have made hotspot devices, Zoom spot devices, they have taken that and they've put it on those devices themselves. We don't make a hotspot device. So it is an open standard that people can use. But I'll give you an example. It's just like D-Star for the longest time. Prior to Kenwood making it, putting D-Star in their radio, ICOM was the only one that had D-Star in there. It's difficult because the protocol is designed for amateur and it doesn't fit a commercial thing. That's why DMR isn't so much, because it's actually an ETSI stand for the European Telecommunication Standard Institute. It's an actually standard. P25 is a standard. NextDen is a standard. That's why you see a lot of different companies make that, because it is considered a public or a commercial standard. And let's be honest with you, no one's going to try to take an amateur thing and make it into a commercial standard because there's not enough money for them.
Okay, thank you.
John, I got a quick question. Are you able to email the link to the white paper that you referenced?
Yeah, I should have it up somewhere on there, and I should be able. I think I still have the safe copy on it somewhere. Otherwise, I'll find it. It's hidden on our website now on it, because we've changed it around a little bit on there. But I should be able to find it for you.
Okay, I know there'll be some people that will ask for that. So
okay, cool.
I don't want to take any more of your time. Everybody, thank you for being here. If anybody else has technical topics, we're trying to get these things happening a lot more frequently than they have been. We were able to recruit John YQS tonight. He's going to do a talk for us in a couple weeks on the app he's developing. Anybody else has technical things or ideas, bod@w7hen.org. I'm going to end the meeting, but thank you for being here tonight. Have a good one.
Yeah, thank you very much for turning me on to this meeting, especially you, Gene. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate that. Yeah, I would very much like to do a presentation. I don't know whether I will actually be able to do a complete